Welcome to the Short Term Show, the show about short-term rentals and long-term wealth, with real property owners hosting real properties who are crushing it in the vacation and short-term rental space. And here's your host, Avery Carl.
If you invest in real estate or manage properties, you need banking that's truly built for your business. Many traditional banks make it difficult to sync banking information across many of the personal finance platforms that we as real estate investors use every day. This is why I recommend Relay. Relay is an online banking and money management platform that's a perfect fit for any real estate business. First, there are no account fees, no overdraft fees, and no minimum balances, which means you get to keep more money in your pocket. Relay also goes above and beyond the banking basics to help you understand precisely what you're earning, spending, and saving. You get up to 20 checking accounts to organize and allocate income for things like day-to-day expenses, investments, or taxes. And if you have multiple investment properties set up as separate business entities, that's no problem. Relay lets you open unlimited accounts and access everything from one single login. Best of all, Relay makes your bookkeeping speedy and meticulous by giving you ultra-detailed transaction data and directly syncing it back to QuickBooks Online and Xero. The ability to have so many separate bank accounts and allocation options in my user dashboard has really transformed my personal banking experience. I will never go back. It takes 10 minutes to apply for a Relay account, and you can do it online at relayfi.com/theshorttermshop. So again, for more information and to open an account, go to relayfi.com/theshorttermshop. Did you know that we're officially back in a buyer's market? That's right. Even though interest rates continue to rise, they are causing prices to fall. So there's finally room for you to do regular real estate investor things that we couldn't do for so long, like gasp, negotiate, make lower offers, ask for sellers to cover some of your closing costs. So it's a really great time to buy in terms of being able to get a lower purchase price and being able to negotiate. So if you're looking for your first or next short-term rental, it's a perfect time to reach out to us at the Short Term Shop. Let our team of agents in any of our true vacation market destinations help you find the perfect investment. Jump on over to theshorttermshop.com and click Get Connected to get started. We are brokered by eXp Realty. See y'all over there. Hey guys, welcome back to the Short Term Show. Today we have a guest that I am very excited about. I'm excited about all of our guests, but this one I'm particularly excited about because I'm a big fan. We have Mr. Pat Hiban. He has written 3 amazing books, the most recent of which is the Quitter's Manifesto, which we're going to talk about today. He's also the founder of GoBundance, which is a mastermind that I am also in the women's side. And he's just done a lot of really cool stuff that we get to hear all about today. So how's it going, Pat?
Hey, Avery, I'm excited. This is an honor. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. And I know you're not super in the podcast world anymore, but I listened to every single episode of Real Estate Rockstars back in the day, especially when I was first starting. And I was driving from Nashville to the Smokies 4 hours each way to show like one house sometimes. And so I would binge. I binged. And actually, my favorite one was the episode with Tracy from $1 Million Listing, where you just started to ask her like 2 questions and she like yelled at her publicist in the room with her and was like, "This guy doesn't know who I am," and like hung up. Yeah.
Yeah. That was funny because she, I was waiting for like a cease and desist letter for years for that. And I actually had it recorded, it was only like 4 minutes long or whatever before she hung up on me. She, she cursed me out. Then she hung up. Simply for asking her how much money she made in, what her net profit was and how many houses she sold. And, I had the recording and I played it. I had it on my phone, actually. I was at a seminar, a GoBundance seminar, and I played it for about 10 people. And I asked them, "What do you think I should do? Do you think I should publish this?" because I was a little afraid about getting sued. And they go, no, because, I mean, she agreed to be recorded. So it's only her fault that she didn't know she wasn't muted. And so after about a week of thinking about it, I said, all right, just do it. And I did it. And man, did she get lit up on YouTube and everywhere we posted it. People would the haters came out.
Oh my goodness. I didn't even think about that. I just remember it was probably like 5 o'clock in the morning and I was halfway to the Smokies and I just pulled over and gotten a Starbucks in Cookeville. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm settling in for another one. And then I didn't realize she didn't think she was on mute. I thought she was just really didn't care that she was being recorded saying all that. But
she thought she put like pause on the video, but she didn't put pause on the audio. And so that's what happened. She goes, I'm muted. She kept telling her sister, I'm muted. She goes, no, you're not. It says it's recording and it could hear everything we're saying.
Oh my goodness. Well, that was podcast brilliance right there. I loved it. But anyway, let's talk about what we're here to talk about. So, Pat, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself so the listeners can get to know you a little better.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm originally from Maryland. I grew up in Maryland, Columbia, Maryland, right outside of Baltimore. And I, basically was a real estate agent in a prior life. I started in real estate when I was 21. I was probably in, the game for 25 years or so. Built a big team, had my own brokerage, had a mortgage company, a title company, all the ancillary businesses, all that fun stuff. And then I got out. And then I wrote my first book, 6 Steps to 7 Figures, which was kind of just about my life in real estate, which, by the way, Bigger Pockets is just re-released. They had me write 2 new chapters. The first chapter I rewrote was how I quit, like how I got out, because so many real estate agents have trouble getting out. Like they're 79 years old and they're trying to close FSBOs for 1-2% commission or instead of 3 or what have you. They're just it's just terrible. But anyways, how I got out, and then the second chapter was what I've done in the last 10 years or so since I got out. And so we put that out. So that's coming out. But anyways, I wrote that. And then there was probably about 3 or 4 years where I just was kind of, I wouldn't say I was lost, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to get into coaching other agents, but then I got frustrated because they wouldn't listen to me and, didn't do what I said. And then I did some other random stuff that I thought would make $1 million or $1 billion, and none of it did. And so over time, I started investing in long-term rentals, and I invested in a bunch of single-family homes, most of them in Maryland. And then I started investing in multifamily rentals with 3 partners, and we started a company called DAPT Acquisitions, which now has over 2,000 doors, mainly in Georgia. Probably about 70% of our stuff is in Georgia, and the other 30 is in Florida. And then I started GoBundance and with partners, and that's almost 10 years now. And and then I wrote the Quitter's Manifesto because a lot of people were asking about that, asking, how I was able to quit. And so along with my partner, Tim Rode, who you met, we wrote the Quitter's Manifesto, and that came out a couple of months ago. And that's according to Bigger Pockets. I haven't been paid yet, but they keep telling me that I've sold like close to 10,000 copies of it. So I'll find out when I get my first check.
I hear you. So yeah, I have a lot of questions about quitting. So you got out of the real estate sales / brokerage business, and you are one of very few agents or brokerage owners who's hit $1 billion in sales. So that's quite a bit to walk away from. And so what I think I'm hearing you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you hadn't yet started investing in real estate. Like you didn't necessarily have that income already when you decided to get out of the brokerage side of things.
I had some of it, I did have some, but I didn't have a significant amount yet. You know what I mean? I had I had single families, and I think we all know that the single families are great for building equity, but they're very hard to lean on for passive income, because what happens is you get one and you might make $5,000 on it one year, but then the next year you lose $6,000. You know what I mean? Just because you have an air conditioner and a new roof to put in, it's just, it's just hard to make the cash flow. So I did have a bunch of single families. But more than anything, I think I also had savings. I saved up money. I saved up enough money. Real estate sales commissions generally for the agent can make you rich but not wealthy. Can make you cash flow. It could fund a nice car and a beautiful house and a guy to cut your yard, but then when you stop, all of a sudden you're like addicted. You realize how addicted you were to the commissions. And so I kind of did what most agents don't do, and that's just I saved money. And I always had, I was always building wealth. I was always creating goals instead of saying, hey, I want to get that Rolex watch and I want to get that, on a fifth car or whatever. I would say, hey, I want to have, $100,000 in gold, or I want to have, 3 houses in this neighborhood that are completely paid off. Just like things, investments were my goals rather than material, flashy things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're totally right about the agents kind of get addicted, and some of them kind of operate like the market's always going to be up. And I personally am like super an anxiety ridden person in general. That's just like my equilibrium. So I'm always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm like, man, real estate's going really good right now. Something bad's about to happen. And I've had a lot of agents this year come to me and be like, oh, I was making so much money last year, and then now the market's changed. How do I find more transactions? How do I find more transactions? And I'm like, dude, you weren't operating last year like it wasn't going to last forever. Because that's all I think when things are going well is like, this is about to end. It's about the other shoe's going to drop. It's about to all be over. So it really, you do have to build some passive income. While you're working in the real estate industry, you have access to all of these, all this wealth of information and ability to buy yourself some investment properties. And it's just crazy to me that more real estate agents don't invest.
They don't. Yeah. And a funny thing that you're going to start discovering, Avery, is that the last couple of years for brokerages and large teams like yours, the agents love you, right? They love Avery because she provides leads, right? And those leads turn in commissions. And so what you're going to see happen is, and you've already seen this happen, is the leads like stop flowing as much. And the agents are so spoiled that it's not their fault. Now it becomes Avery's fault. And so as the broker and the team leader and the rainmaker, they're like, Avery, make it rain more. And you're like, oh, I don't want to spend the money to make it rain more. And they're like, oh, well, this other broker is doing first-time home buyer seminars. There's other brokers advertising in the equestrian and farm magazine that, why don't you advertise in that? And then all of a sudden they start wanting to take the money back that you've made over the last 5 years. So it's going to be fascinating for brokers and for agents to see what happens. But I'm a little bit afraid of like a pretty strong slowdown next year. I know it was very controversial at the Bigger Pockets because David Green was on stage, and I love David. He's a great friend. Yet he was very, very optimistic. And what was your take on that optimism?
Part of me is and part of me isn't. So I've already established that I operate under the worst case scenario at all times. So it's very difficult for me as a person to be optimistic about things. It's just so hard to say because when I'm researching and I'm reading news articles and things like that, and it's just hard to know where people are coming from, what the motivation is of writing that article. And so it's hard for me to really piece together what's actually happening with the interest rates. And, some articles will say they're supposed to come down first or second quarter next year. Some are saying not until 2024. So I don't feel comfortable enough with my own understanding of it to really even comment, just because there's so much conflicting information out there. I'd like to be optimistic, obviously, because I'm in the business, but who knows, it is a good time. I will say that as far as our buyers are concerned, it has been a pretty good time to buy in terms of getting deals and getting discounts and closing costs contributed to. But for our seller side, not such a great time to sell.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was very conflicted and I journaled about it a lot because, see, I've been wrong. Like I thought the market was peaking out about 4 years ago. So I got smacked, like, while people like you and David were making tons of equity, buying single family homes over the last 3 or 4 years. I was like, oh, I'm not buying any more singles. I'm not buying anything because it's maxed out and I'm going to actually sell some things. And looking back now as an idiot, I was like, damn, I wish I had just leveraged everything and bought every house in my neighborhood, and just kept buying up. So you're right. I've been smacked so hard that I've learned that, just like you, that I really don't know. My gut's like, I think it's going to be a lot different next year, but that could just be jealousy and spite because I missed out on the last 4 years of buying. So who knows where that emotion is coming from?
Yeah, it's hard to say. And there have been people saying for 4 or 5 years, oh, we're at the peak, the crash is coming, we're at the peak, the crash is coming. It just kept going up and up and up. And I don't know if the word crash is appropriate. Correction, probably. I don't know at what the threshold is from changing to the word from correction to crash. But I think it's already corrected quite a bit. I think values have already come down some. So it's just really hard to say.
Something, I'm going to shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
It's something interesting that's top of mind this morning, actually. So I'm friends with a builder who, I live on Folly Beach, South Carolina, which is an island, right? It's about 6 miles long, and like a quarter mile wide, right? It's just like a big oval. And so there's 2,400 houses, and they're trying to pass a law that says you can only short-term rental 800 of them. Currently, there's 1,000 short-term rental licenses. And they're saying that's too much, right? It needs to be 33% of all the people. Myself, I live in a house that, is our primary residence. So they want it to be 2/3 people like me, 1/3 short-term rentals. Well, my builder buddy has like 6 houses under construction on the island. And yesterday they put a moratorium on short-term rental licenses. So he can't get short-term rental licenses on any of these builders, any of these houses he's building for people who plan on short-term rentaling them and who are buying them based on the value that they're going to be short-term rentals and going to pay their mortgages with short-term rentals. And they put a moratorium on it. So he doesn't know what to do. And it's very interesting. And they're hoping that during that moratorium, they're going to figure out whether or not to pass this law of 800, which would mean we're already 200 over the 800. So they wouldn't be able to get a short-term rental license until 200 of the 1,000 sold, which is going to be a lifetime.
That's really interesting.
Do you see that happening? Do you see that happening in other towns?
So not in any of the 15 markets that we're in right now, but I have been wrapped up in the middle of that before, when we had an office in Nashville. back when we used to live in Nashville. We had an office there, and I had this same thing happen, and it happened to like 4 or 5 clients at one time. So Nashville has just like, they keep shrinking and shrinking the areas that short-term rentals are allowed in the zonings. And so obviously all the developers would go buy up everything in those little areas and create these big short-term rental specific condo developments and townhome developments. And what would happen is that people would get under contract on these things pre-construction, like 2 years before they're finished. And by the time they were finished, they're paying prices based on, there's a premium on short-term rentable properties in Nashville. And they were paying these higher than usual prices because of the ability to do that. And then by the time they get to closing, it's not allowed anymore. It's against the rules. And then the developers are like, well, we're not letting you out of these contracts, because then we have to let all 50 of you out of these contracts and we're going to lose our asses. And so it was a lot of lawsuits and a lot of just stuff that you don't want to have to deal with. You don't want your clients to have to deal with. So I shut down my Nashville office after that. I'm like, we're not dealing with that anymore, because it was just watching these poor buyers go through this, because sometimes it was like their life savings that they're spending on one of these things. And yeah, it's just rough.
I think they'll bail, right? I think they'll bail because what this proposal says here, and it's probably similar in Nashville too, was like, if you sold, you lost your license.
Yeah. So what they were doing in Nashville to get around that is they were putting the property in an LLC and putting the permit in that same LLC, and then selling the entire LLC so that it doesn't look like necessarily like a transfer on the tax records, on the real estate tax records. That's what they were doing. But that just made me uncomfortable.
Can you get a loan in an LLC? Like, can you buy, I wonder how you do that. Can you buy an LLC with a mortgage, or do you have to pay cash? If you buy an LLC and the LLC owns real estate,
I'm not exactly sure.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they were doing it, but that's what they were doing. And I was just got to the point where I was like, if we're having to do all this crazy tap dancing just to buy a house, maybe this is not the place to do this.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. Well, it goes to the discussion, which I know you wanted to have anyways, about diversifying, right? Like, why should we diversify our wealth? Meaning short-term, long-term, cash, gold, stocks, notes, anything. Like, why should you diversify anything versus just being 100% short-term rentals?
Yeah. So that is a really great question. And people will ask me that all the time, especially people really love to ask me this when I'm in front of a lot of people, like, oh, the short-term rental chick, I got you now. Because they'll say, well, if short-term rentals are so great, why do you own so many long-term rentals?
Oh.
And I'm like, yeah. And I'm like, oh, you got me. But actually it's because diversification is important. And a really great example of that is when COVID happened. We didn't have as many doors as we have now, but we had 5 short terms, and I think we're at like 75 long terms. And when COVID initially happened, we were like, crap, there it is. The short terms are going down. It finally happened. And we said to ourselves, well, good thing we had all these long terms so that when it can carry the short terms while all this pandemic stuff is going on. And then it was actually the opposite that happened. So then the short terms boomed after that initial 2-week shutdown, or 4-week, or however long it ended up being. And it was our long terms that we had to worry about with the eviction moratoriums. But either way that pendulum swung, we were in good shape because we had other types of assets. So I will never forget that, because if we'd been all in on either one, we could have gotten in trouble. But so I think that you really do have to treat short terms as a springboard and a cash flow turbocharger to be able to grow your portfolio in whatever way you want. There's nothing wrong with having 1,000 short terms, but it's really good to have other types of investments. Also, maybe move into multifamily, things like that.
Yeah, my wealth is quite diversified. I probably have, like, if you took 100% of it, I probably have 25 in multifamily, 25%. I probably have 15% in long-term rentals, 5% in short-term rentals, something like that. Like, I think all in all, real estate wise, I'm about 55%. And that includes all asset classes of real estate, short-term, long-term, multifamily, self-storage, stuff like that. And then the other 45% is venture capital funds, stocks, cash, gold, stuff like that, more liquid type stuff. And it's interesting. I think you have to diversify as much as possible. And I think you also have to diversify as far as areas. Like you can't go everything in Nashville or everything in Folly Beach. Even long term, I had two situations happen. I had 7 long-term rentals at University of Maryland College Park. And at one point, and I bought them actually in 2000. So I've had them. Well, I still have 3. I sold 4. And the reason I sold 4 of the 7 was mainly to diversify because I had too much there. Because what happened is at one point they instituted rent control and they tried to have all the landlords send their leases in. And that took like 2 years and we fought it with lawyers and it didn't pass. It failed. It actually passed, but they couldn't get enough employees at the city to like oversee it. So they gave up on it. And then the second thing that happened that messed me up by having 7 of them in one place was they built a huge apartment building across the street from my 7 rentals, and it sucked the wind out of the rent and sucked the wind out of all my tenants. And so there was like a 3 or 4 year period that I had to wait for equilibrium to happen again, where I was like begging for tenants and I actually had to drop the rent and I had to rent a couple to families instead of students, which, cut the rent by like half because a family is only going to pay about half of what a student would pay for a room times 6 or whatever. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's a really good point, because that's a question that I hear a lot is, should I buy multiple rentals in one place, especially short terms? Like, should I buy them all in one place or should I buy one here and one there? And you kind of could go either way with that. So there's what you just described, where if you have too many in one place and something happens, then it happens to all of them. Whereas if you're in 2 different places, it only happens to 50%. But there's then also I've already got this system built in one place and it's a lot easier to just keep adding properties to this one system than have to build them in multiple places. So that's a question that we get quite a bit. And
right.
Yeah,
I mean, it wasn't too long ago that Gatlinburg had a big fire, right?
Yeah, we had one this year and one in 2016.
So if you have 30 of them in Gatlinburg and then, there's another fire, I mean, it takes a while to get the insurance company to cut you a check for lost rent. You know what I mean? That's a process.
Oh, yeah. And then, down here in Florida with our other rentals, we just had Ian. Luckily for us, we're in the Panhandle, so it just got a little windy one day. But we've had them in the past, like Hurricane Michael in Panama City a few years ago, and the Forgotten Coast was pretty rough. So it really is good to have them in multiple places, not just multiple asset classes, but also multiple locations. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content of our podcast, but you have additional short-term rental questions, we host a weekly live question session that you guys can join for free. It's at 1 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays. And if you head over to strquestions.com, you can sign up. So not only am I the host of this show, but I also own and manage my own properties, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have about short-term rental investing. So please join us anytime for a free weekly live Q&A on Zoom. Sign up at strquestions.com. All right, so I'm going to change gears on you really quick because I want to talk about Quitter's Manifesto. Because a lot of our listeners and a lot of people who want to get into real estate investing, they're in some kind of job or some kind of situation that they want to quit. So let's just talk about the book for a minute. You want to give us just a brief overview for those who aren't familiar with it yet, what it's about, and then we'll go into it?
Yeah, sure. So Tim and I sat out to write a book about quitting. We're in the we're a quitters nation. There's this great resignation going on. People are quitting more than ever before in the history of the United States. And we didn't want to write a book that was strategic. Like we didn't want to write oh, you can do it, good job, like motivating people. Because, we don't know if they should quit or not. So we wanted to write a book that was more tactical, that was more like a how-to, like if they knew that they should quit, if they knew that they wanted to quit, how do you do it? And we liken it to like a trapeze at a circus, where this book was going to contain two things. It was going to contain like a safety net that the trapeze artists, when they're at the circus, can fall on. So we teach you how to build a trapeze net, and then chapter by chapter was going to give you the rings that the trapeze artist holds on to as they swing across the area, the safety net. So we teach you basically how to build a safety net, and then we teach you how to build the trapeze rings. And that's the book. And it's done really well. And to your question, which is, how do you know whether you're one of the people that should start building a trapeze? We have something in the book called a soul-sucking audit. And what the soul-sucking audit does is ask you a series of questions that have to do with 5 things. The first is your compensation, how much you get paid now from your job. The second is the respect that you get from your boss and from your coworkers, from people around you when you say what you do. It's all about the respect, right? The third is the fit. Like, are you fit? Are you a fit for this team? Right? Are you a fit for this organization? That sort of thing. The fourth is your prospects for growth. Like, are you really going to be the CEO one day? Are you going to own 10% of this company one day? Are you, is there a job? Are there enough jobs ahead of you to make you wealthy? And the last one is, and this is a big one, is how you feel every morning, right? It's like how you feel when you're on your way to work, how you feel when you log into your email, how you feel in the morning, before work, during work, after work, and how is that affecting your life and your well-being? And so we put you through the soul-sucking audit, and if you score like a 70% or better, we say, keep your job. It's just stay there. It's not that bad. But if you score less than a 70%, you fail, we say, you should leave. It's time to leave. And here's how you're going to do it. Read the book, go step by step through the book, and this is how you do it.
I just did a little mental soul-sucking audit of my last job that I had before I quit. And oh my gosh, all the things like respect. I remember one time, and I'm going to sound like an entitled millennial right now, but I don't care. So my boss was like, Avery, go put ice on my orchid. And it wasn't like hey, do you mind doing this really quick? Or like a respectful, it was like a barking at me in front of everybody in a meeting, go put ice on my orchid. And I'm like, all right, cool. I guess I'm worth putting ice on the orchids. And then prospects for growth was really what spoke to me. And that was what made me eventually say, all right, I'm out of here. Because we'd started our real estate investing journey about the same time. And we were getting pretty close for me to be able to replace my income anyway. But it was a really small company in the music business in Nashville, publishing company. And the girl who was one rung ahead of me on the ladder left and went somewhere else. And I went in my boss's office and I was like, hey, I want this job. I want Liz's job and I can totally do it. And she told me no. And I was making no money. I was making $37,000 a year. There was not going to be another opportunity to move up. It was just too small of a company. People were getting laid off all the time anyway. And so when she told me no, I was like, all right, that's it. I didn't do it right then, but I started figuring out, how and when this book would have been perfect for me back then, but it didn't exist. This was years ago, but that's a good audit. I checked all the boxes mentally as you were saying that, and it turns out I'm just not a good employee. Like I had 3 or 4 jobs in 3 or 4 years and I'm a terrible employee. And I can admit that about myself. But anyway, that's pretty cool. The soul-sucking audit. I like that.
Yeah, it's a good part of the book, and that's funny. That's really cool that you went through that. So, and I'm the same way. I can't work for somebody else. I just get fired. It's hard enough even having partners, and I have partners with both of the active companies now, and we went through really hard times, getting along. Now we get along great, because they're both like massively successful, but yeah, it's the same thing. It's like some of us are just not cut out, and really, really nobody's cut out. I mean, I guess there's some people that are really submissive that are cut out for Avery put ice on my orchids. Um, but I would think that very few people should be cut out for that.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think anybody is going to like to be told to do that. So oh gosh, I just hit my mic. Sorry. So when you talk about setting up a safety net and you're creating these rings to swing across the safety net, are most of those things, without giving up too much of the book, because we want you guys to go buy Pat's book, are all of these things related to setting up investments and real estate investments, or are they other types of things too?
Well, so yeah, so the safety net is kind of like, I can talk about it a little bit. I mean, the safety net is kind of comes in a couple of parts. The first is, to just get real. Like a lot of people, when you ask them, what are your expenses? They just give you some round number that they're just making up. They're not real about their numbers. So we ask you to get real and say like, okay, how much exactly do you have saved up that you're not going to spend? What are your investments? What kind of credit can you access legitimately? Like, who can you borrow money from? Can you borrow money from your mom? How much? Can you get a line of credit from the bank as a home equity loan? Okay, how much? So get real, right? Let's look at the exact things and focus on them and add them up. How much is it costing you bare minimum every month, where you would start getting behind in your bills if you didn't have any income coming in? And then we actually encourage you to move forward on the credit. So, get as much credit cards as you can. Get overdraft accounts on your checking account. Get home equity lines of credit. And there's a neat trick that you need to do now with home equity lines of credit. And this happened last time the market slowed down. Was you can get home equity lines of credit now because the appraisals are coming in really high. But you need to take the cash out of that bank and out of that line of credit and move it to a separate bank that's not related. Because last time what happened is that, they would say, okay, you're good for $100,000 line of credit. And then if you didn't use the money, they started to reappraise the houses as the market went down, and they dropped everybody's line of credit. So you thought you had $100,000, then you looked and they dropped it down to $25,000 without even telling you. They just mailed you a letter or an email and said, hey, we dropped you down to $25,000 because we had somebody drive by your house and they said it's now worth, $75,000 less. So take the money out and put it in another bank. Ask people, like, if you're going to do private loans from your mom, ask them and try to get the money and get it all lined up. And that would all be your safety net. This really real stuff, right? And of course you got to figure out how much you're going to need. Some people going to need 6 months. Some people are going to need 3 months. Some people are going to need a year. Some people, whatever. But whatever you're going to quit and go to do, get real about when you're going to need money and just build all that out before you quit.
Seems reasonable, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's no magic powder, right? The book is not like,
Totally.
hey, sprinkle this magic dust and you can quit. The book is more like very tactical, like, okay, here's how other successful people have done it. I mean, we interviewed like 20 people that quit. That's how we came up with a lot of this stuff. And then we actually have case studies in the book of people that had actually quit and successfully. And so, it's all real life stuff.
Totally. And I think I like that you interviewed so many people and you have the case studies, because everybody's going to find something relatable to their own situation there. And So I think that's really cool. And I don't want to say too much about it. I've read Pat's other books, guys, and they're really, really good. And this one is on my list. So I'll report back after I do get it read. But if his other books are any indication, it's going to be a great one. So Pat, thank you so much for coming on today. Really, really valuable information. We've got 3 questions that we ask everyone at the end of the show. And the first one is, what advice would you give 20-year-old Pat, knowing what you know now?
It's kind of a loaded question, but the reality of it is buy more real estate. So there's going to be a time where real estate doesn't really move up or down like it does. I've been in those times. I think like all through the 90s. I got my real estate license 1987. All through the 90s, like the real estate market didn't change at all. Like it didn't get worse, it didn't get better. Like I would sell 30 houses a year as a single agent and 1 year, and then I would sell 31 the next and 29 the next. It was so consistent. It was crazy. And looking back at my 20-year-old self, I think I would have bought a house every year or a house every 6 months. I bought my first house at 23, and then I bought another house at 24. And then I actually stopped. I don't know why I stopped. Then it was probably another 10 years before I started buying more. But I think if you just dollar cost average real estate, you can't go wrong, right? Especially if you can get these long-term Fannie Mae mortgages, max them out, get them in your personal name, forget about the LLCs for a while, and you could always transfer them later. Don't get caught up in that because you get really bad loans when you try to buy in an LLC. Just try to max out. I think you could get 10 now. They will drop that. At one point it was like 3, then it went up to like 12. Now it's down to 10. So it will change as things tighten. So that's the advice I would give. I would have a lot more single families, I think.
I feel so validated that you just said that about the conventional loans, because I always tell people, max out your conventional loans first. It's always going to be the cheapest, easiest, best loan. And some people are like, no, but I heard about this really cool thing that somebody did on a podcast where they did this bridge loan and then they refi and then they did all this crazy stuff. Just get the conventional financing and then worry about the rest of it later. That's really good advice.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Second question, kind of along the same lines as the first one, but what advice would you give a new investor who's looking to get started today at kind of the end of 2022?
So I tell this to a lot of new investors, like it's very hard, I think, to buy the first house. I think it's become easier, but it's scary. And people are always like, well, the numbers don't work in my market, right? The numbers don't work in my market. And you got to look at the numbers. You got to look at, it's got to make sense. I don't agree with people who are buying houses that don't cash flow, that don't, they're buying houses now just to get the depreciation and the cost collateralization or whatever, which I think is great benefits if you are a real estate professional tax wise. But it won't last, and also just shouldn't even be factored into the equation, in my opinion. So it's got a cash flow. So you have to, so a lot of times in order to cash flow it, you can't buy in your neighborhood, because your neighborhood, you buy a house right now and the rent, it's not 1%. It's not even 0.5%. It's, 0.3% or whatever. So I'd say get out. So my advice to answer the question is get out of your neighborhood, be willing to drive like 90 minutes or so, go to more of a rural or more of a class D, like or C, or a bad neighborhood, and buy a cheap house, rent it out Section 8, government housing, or rent it out, whatever, just not ideal, and just get your head kicked in, learn the hard way, do something that's affordable. I've done that multiple times. When I first started, I've evicted people myself. I've done the whole thing, you know. I mean, it's part of the game. You got to learn it. And I think if you aren't willing to do all that, you'll probably never pull the trigger, and you'll probably make a mistake, and you'll buy something that doesn't cash flow, and you'll just lose money every year. And then you'll sell it after 4 years and be $50,000 in the loss because you wanted to buy where you were comfortable, and the numbers clearly don't work where you're comfortable. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Sometimes in real estate investing, you have to get uncomfortable, and you don't always, not everybody. As a matter of fact, most people don't live in the best place to invest. So you do have to get comfortable getting outside your zip code for sure. And last question, what is your favorite book that has impacted your mindset?
So, you know, I was really lucky when I was like 23 or something. This guy, he was an Amway salesman. And then he became a loan officer, and he was trying to get my lender business. And he would bring me books, like every month he'd bring me another book that they taught him in Amway school. And it was all these classic books, Think and Grow Rich, you know, all this really good stuff that I had never heard of. And I devoured it. But the best book, and I still have it, I carried it around with me. So I mean, it's like worn. It's like 25 years old. I think is As a Man Thinketh, by James Allen. They redid it to As You Think to make it more gender neutral, but same book, As You Think. And it's all about thoughts are things. Like you can manifest things through proper thought. And it's also taught me things like the calm, serene human being is always loved and revered. That's a direct quote, right? Like stay calm, you know, stay collected, and you know, people will like you a lot more than the guy who's all loud and obnoxious and, you know, in the way or causing, you know, escalating things rather than de-escalating things. So that's my favorite book to this day. I've probably journaled on it so many times. And there's as far as newer books, if you haven't read the Almanac of Naval Ravikant, that's a great book, and I've actually read that several times and like highlighted and underlined it. It's the same sort of, he's a modern day business philosopher, so it's definitely mindset focused, but he's more business mindset, and he's just kind of a modern day philosopher. So it's fascinating to read rather than, you know, someone who was born 100 years ago.
Awesome. 2 great recommendations. Well, Pat, thank you again so much for coming on. And if our listeners want to follow you, learn more about you, all of the above, where can they find you?
So a lot of places, but the easiest one, Avery, is just going to be Quitters Manifesto Book. QuittersManifestoBook.com. QuittersManifestoBook.com. There's like a reach out to me button. There's a thing for the book. We have a companion guide to the book that we're giving away for free because we're building a little coaching company, and we've built out like a coaching platform, and we're giving that away free for a while, just to get started on that. So QuittersManifestoBook.com.
Awesome. Thank you again so much for coming on, Pat, and we will catch you later.
Yeah, it was fun.